Ryan Asunto, thank you for joining me today. And I want to start off by just giving you a second to tell our viewers who you are and a little bit about NCF and what you guys do. And then we're gonna then I'll talk about what we're gonna get into today and when we'll get going. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I'm Ryan Asunto. I have the privilege of serving as the president of NCF Austin. So that's National Christian Foundation Austin. We're a charitable giving partner that helps people find creative ways to give more to the causes they care about most. NCF is a 38-year-old donor advised fund sponsor. We have a national office in Alpharetta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, and local offices in about 30 different metropolitan areas across the country. So I run the Austin office and have a team of 3 here locally, but we have about 300 team members nationwide with our organization. We have the privilege of giving away lots and lots of money to great causes. In fact, NCF in aggregate gives away almost $100 million a month to different nonprofits all across the world. We serve probably 20,000 givers and have one of the things we'll talk about today, one of the things that sets NCF apart is we've got an in-house team of gift planning attorneys and support staff. We've actually got a complex gift services team that's probably 40 or 50 people deep that helps people give assets for charitable purposes.
Yeah, and I know I didn't know the third founder, but 2 of the 3 founders, I guess Ron Blue and Larry Burkett, both have had an impact on my career over the last 3.5 decades. And it's amazing the impact that this idea, would you say 38 years ago? Is that what it was?
That's right.
It's close to the time I got. Yeah, it's about the time I got into this industry as a very young man. And man, $100 million a month. Is that what you said?
About that. Yeah, it's over $1 billion a year for the last handful of years.
Yeah, that's just astounding. And you and I have known each other for the last few years, and I've just really come to admire you as a person, but also, I appreciate the work you guys do. And our mission at Wise Counsel is to improve lives and inspire generosity. And sometimes I think people wonder, well, what do you mean by inspire generosity? Well, one of the ways that we try to do that is by educating people. Folks are either wired to be givers or they're not, and that's fine. When they are, then it really is helpful if you are aware of more than just the basic ways to give. And I think most folks, Ryan, when they think about charitable giving, they think of what? Writing a check, right?
Absolutely.
Cash.
Yeah.
And I've never had a nonprofit or a ministry complain about somebody writing a check, right?
Right.
But the other thing they think about, everybody goes through, the charitable lines at Goodwill or here locally, Caring Place or whatever. And we give our older things away, and so those are the most common things people think about. But boy, when you get into this world of philanthropy and charitable giving techniques, there is a big toolbox of ideas and techniques out there. And when somebody is motivated and they want to give, they can really expand their impact when they do it in an informed way. And,
right.
And so that's one of the reasons we like to have guys like you on. I want people to know about NCF Austin, and I want people to understand that there are just so many creative, effective tools you can use as a charitable or generous person. And you just need to know where to get that thinking when the time comes, not after the fact. That's not good. You want to know before the fact, right? Before the gift.
That's
so
right.
Today we're going to dig into one in particular that we've never talked about on Wise Counsel Live, but we're also going to talk about one we have talked about before. So let's just kind of get into, first of all, the basics of the 2 strategies we're going to talk about, and then we'll talk about some application of those. The first one is what is typically called a donor advised fund. I know you guys have a very big presence in that space. I think you call it the giving fund. Talk about a donor advised fund and just kind of at a high level. What is it? How does it work?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so donor advised funds, or like you mentioned, we call them giving funds, and we named them that internally just because that's really what they are. They're a tool for people to give from. And so you can think of a donor advised fund like a charitable savings account where you put cash or other assets in the fund. You receive your tax deduction at the time of that gift. And then you are able to be thoughtful and strategic about sending grants out of that fund to the charities you care about most. So they can be really helpful at separating the tax benefits of charitable giving from the actual strategic granting that people want to make. And one of the beauties of a donor advised fund is that it can receive and hold all sorts of different assets. So Bob, you mentioned, when you're used to the typical operating procedure for charitable giving is you learn of a request, you learn of a need, and you start thinking about what size check can I write? You start thinking about cash, right? Giving cash. Mm-hmm. And that's wonderful. Charities love it. But the truth is, over 90% of wealth held in America is held in something other than cash. Only 10% is cash. But then when you look at how Americans own things, right? 90% is non-cash, 10% is cash. Mm-hmm. Then when you look at how do Americans give things, 80% of all charitable giving in America is cash-based. It's done in cash. So 80% of all charitable giving in America is coming out of a little tiny slice of the wealth pie that our nation holds. So when people start thinking about real philanthropy and really high-level giving, you need to start thinking about things other than cash. And a donor advised fund is a great vehicle because it can receive those other gifts, it can hold those other gifts, and then use them for really efficient and effective charitable purposes.
Oh, that's a great summary. And there's so many. You don't want to get too far into the details about donor advised funds today, because we really want to spend more time on the Charitable Remainder Trust idea.
Right.
But I will say that we've seen over the last couple of years with some of the tax law changes, there's been a lot more interest in as we bring up just basic donor advised fund strategies for people. There's been a lot of interest in using those. And the one thing on my wish list, I don't know if you've heard anything more about this, but boy, if we could get donor advised funds qualified to be the recipient of RMD based giving, qualified charitable distributions, that would be fantastic. And I've heard a rumor that there's potentially going to be a bill introduced to that effect, but with administration, transition and all that, who knows? Have you heard anything recently on where that stands?
I've heard the same rumor, and I'd love to tell you that I knew it was going to come true, but I don't have that kind of a crystal ball, and who knows how long the next tax law change will take to get through the next administration and Congress. Right. We do have a solution for that for people who want to give their R&Ds, if you will, their qualified charitable distributions from an IRA. We have a solution for that in a single charity fund. It works a little bit differently than a donor advised fund. You have to name the benefiting charity on the front end, but it does allow you to control how quickly that charity receives those funds. And you can set up multiples for different charities. So you can put a charity on a granting schedule, if you will. So if you want them to get a certain amount of money, but you want them to get it spaced out over time, you can do that through a single charity fund and use your qualified charitable distribution to do that.
Yeah, that might be a good topic for another day. Well, let's talk a little bit about this other idea that we've mentioned briefly. Can you see my my little chart here?
I can. I love your diagram.
Well, it's just a simple visual. Sometimes it's easier to follow these ideas, and there's a few more moving parts in a charitable remainder trust than a donor advised fund. So I thought it might be helpful to at least have a visual. And the way I've always looked at what we do, Ryan, here generally as wealth management advisors and financial advisors is I don't have to be an expert at everything. In fact, it's not possible. I have to be more like a librarian, right? and I have to know where to go find the experts when we need them. And I know you're the same way. We would both be the first to say today, neither of us is an expert at Charitable Remainder Trust.
Right.
That's why you've got this army of attorneys and specialists backing you up, and it's the reason I have those types of people backing us up in this and other areas. But what we do have is we have somewhat of a working knowledge of these tools, and we also know how to go out and say, all right, Mr. and Mrs. Client, here's what you've said you want to accomplish, and here are some possible strategies that might help you do that more effectively. And so this is just another one of those types of ideas. And it's an interesting concept because the average person, in my experience, Ryan, they don't know that there's a way to give an asset and still take income back off of that gift while they're alive. And then eventually the asset goes to the charity. And that's the basic idea behind a charitable remainder trust. And you have a donor who wants to set up a charitable trust and give either cash or, more commonly, if they're going to go to the trouble of setting this up, an asset that has gone up a lot in value. And if they sold it, they would have to pay a lot of capital gains tax on it. Instead, if they donate it, then they don't have to pay the capital gains tax all at once, and they get a partial charitable deduction for the year that they make the gift. Of course, it gets into a lot of calculations on how much that deduction is and those kinds of things. But the basic idea is all we're trying to communicate at this point, and that is, let's say, for example, somebody had $1 million piece of real estate, and it was almost all gain. And if they sold it, they would pay maybe a couple $100,000 in long-term capital gains tax, and they would have, $800,000 left. But on the other hand, if they donated it to a charitable remainder trust, depending on how they structured it, they might get a deduction for maybe a third of that today. And so they don't get the whole $1 million deduction. Maybe they get about a third of that, but still that's a pretty big deduction. And the big thing that is unique about these trusts is that they get an income coming back from that trust to whoever they decide it should go to. It can be themselves. It can be themselves and another charity. It can be themselves and other family members. And that's where you can really get creative with using this tool. And another thing that's interesting is you can set the income stream up to be either a fixed dollar amount, right? Or it can be a percentage of the trust value from year to year.
That's right.
And people may have heard of the idea of a charitable remainder annuity trust or a charitable remainder unit trust, and those are basically the two differences. So, I mean, you've seen a lot of people over the years through NCF use donor advised funds. You've seen a lot of them use charitable remainder trusts, and it's also the case where sometimes they'll use them both together. So I think with the rest of our time, I wanted to kind of try to make it as simple as we can for people to understand these are tools. And here are some ways you might use one or the other or both. So let's talk about that a little. I'll kick it back over to you. I've been rambling about the CRTs. Just talk a little bit about the CRT concept, and let's kick it around how somebody might use this.
Yeah. So thanks. What I love about the CRT, this charitable remainder trust idea, is it really can serve two different needs, as you talked about, Bob. It can support the family, and it's going to support charity at some point in time. There's going to be some question about when, but there's going to be support to charity. So in my world of philanthropy, we refer to this. It falls kind of in a class of gifts called a split interest gift. And charitable remainder trusts fall in this category, charitable lead trusts fall in this category, and CGA's charitable gift annuities fall in this category. And so what they do is they split the benefit of a gift back to the family and then also to charity. So in a charitable remainder trust, the family benefits first and the charity benefits from the remainder generally.
Mhm.
But what you see is these charitable remainder trusts can be set up to do a lot of different things. One, as you mentioned, is, as we talked about, is spray income back to the family, whether that's a set dollar amount or a percentage of earnings or a percentage of the value of the asset in the trust. But it can also be set up to be a giver itself during its life. And so when the charitable remainder trust can give as the trust, you can help the family avoid any unnecessary income recognition through the life of the trust and send money directly to charity, and then preserve even more of the value downstream for charitable giving. We talk about how these these tools can be used together. A donor advised fund can be the benefiting charity of a charitable remainder trust. So the donor advised fund would then allow the family to divide up the remaining interest among multiple charities so that they don't have to, when you set up a charitable remainder trust, you got to pick a charitable beneficiary that may or may not still be in existence at the end of the life of the charitable remainder trust.
Well, also, it may not even be your passion may change, right? You may start off. I mean, a lot of times these trusts are set up for 20 years or a lifetime, right, of the donors, and that's a hang up people can have. It's like, well, today my passion is drilling water wells in Africa, but who knows, 10 years from now, my passion may be helping, orphans down in South America. And so that's one of the things I love about not naming a specific charity, as the ultimate receiver of that remainder gift. By using the donor advised fund there, as you said, you can, as long as it's a qualified charitable recipient, right, that donor advised fund can support all of those or either or.
It can, and it can also be, the donor advised fund can exist in perpetuity. So it can, the heirs could be named as the advisors on the donor advised fund. So for a family who really wanted to pass along a legacy of generosity to their children, they can, again, as we've talked about, put an asset in a CRT, have the CRT own that asset and create an income stream for them as long as they live. And then the remainder interest goes into a donor advised fund, and the children get to work together to decide where to send those dollars away. They don't get to use them personally. They get to give them away. So you really are passing along a legacy of giving and beginning to pass along some values to the next generation. And the CRUT becomes a great, and I'm using some slang there, right? Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, CRUT, can be useful for passing along a legacy of giving to your kids.
Yeah, I get so excited talking about this stuff. I'm just sitting here thinking of all the potential applications, and one of the things that I know you and I have discussed before is that this is this is a fantastic way to build up kind of almost like an endowment long term for funding, either that donor advised fund and a family legacy of giving going forward, or even if it's a single entity, an alma mater or cancer or whatever it is that you feel called to support. However, the downside to this, if this is where it stops, is that the actual charitable gift is not going to happen for years, right? I mean, the gift has happened to the trust, but the actual charity itself is not going to get any financial help for decades potentially. And so you and I have talked about that. And if again, it always comes down to the circumstances, right, of the donor. But let's say, for example, let's go back to our hypothetical example of somebody who put $1 million of real estate into the CRT. The real estate is sold. And now let's say that the way the trust was structured is they were going to get $50,000 a year of income back somewhere.
Mhm.
And then eventually whatever was left in that trust would go to this donor advised fund. But let's say they don't need any of that income. The donor has other assets, other income. Um, Talk about how they could use the donor advised fund to further leverage that income coming off the trust, where they're not only waiting to leave this big chunk later, but they're also able to be generous with the income spinning off the trust now.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So again, the Charitable Remainder Trust fits in the category of charitable gifts that are split interest gifts, where you're dividing benefit between the family and charity. If the family needs no benefit, you don't want to use a split interest gift. You want to use a complete gift, if you will. You want to use a whole gift, and that would be a tool like a donor advised fund or a private foundation or something like that. The benefit of the donor advised fund, there's several. One is they're a whole lot easier to set up, right? You go online, you set up an account in about 5 minutes, and you have your donor advised fund, and it's ready to receive gifts. The CRUT, you go to an attorney, go to a specialist. They're relatively expensive. They take a while to put together. They can be put together, but they're not as easy as opening an account online. So the donor advised fund is easier to open, and then when you make a gift into it, your deduction is based on the full fair market value of the asset. So with a charitable remainder trust, your deduction is the calculated value of what will the remaining interest, what's it expected to be at the end of the life of the trust. And as we mentioned earlier, in $1 million gift example with a 65-year-old giver who has a second life, CRUT, their deduction is probably going to be about a third of the asset value. With the donor advised fund, that asset is the value of the asset at the time of the gift becomes the basis for the deduction. So you're looking at $1 million deduction as opposed to a 1/3 of $1 million deduction. And then with the DAF, once that asset sells and is liquid, you can start making grants immediately to the charities that you want to support. So you can give away a certain percentage of that. You can give away all of that. Whatever you don't give away can be reinvested for growth, and that DAF can last for a very, very long time, depending on earnings and the grant rate.
Would there ever be a situation where there would be, clearly making the gift directly to the donor advised fund is the cleanest, simplest, lowest cost way to do it of the two scenarios we're talking about. But would there ever be a planning situation where it would be worth setting up, even though you don't really need the income off of the charitable remainder trust as an individual income source, still setting it up and having that income directed back to the DAF? Would there ever be or is that just adding a layer of complexity and expense that's unnecessary?
So it depends, is the answer, of course, because it always is, right, in these scenarios. But the way we see donor advised funds and charitable remainder trust used together most frequently is when a family is approaching an event, if it's a business sale or a real estate sale or something like that, and they generally are thinking in 3 buckets. They have an amount of money that they know they're going to need to live off of. Then they have an amount of money that they know they're going to give away and be charitable with. And in the middle, there sits this great big unknown chasm of, I don't think I'm going to need this money, but I might, right? So it's the what if bucket. And the CRUT makes a great what if bucket. So we do see families use multiple tools all the time, depending on their scenario. You can think of the donor advised fund as, I know I'm going to give this money away.
Right.
You can think of the charitable remainder trust as maybe I'll need this, maybe I won't, kind of a bucket. And then the money that you know you're going to need probably just sits in a personal bucket most frequently. It can sit in the CRUT, but if you wanted it, if you knew there was an amount of money that you needed in relatively short order, in other words, with a CRUT, you're going to get a percentage of that money coming to you for a long time, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8%, something like that. But if you know you've got needs that you got to take care of, and you don't want 5% of that value, you need all of that value. You receive that personally. Then you receive some money into a CRUT and some money into a DAF, and all of those things work together to make a person's financial plan work out better.
Boy, that is a great way to explain it. I love the what if bucket idea, because I really think that's true. I mean, that's where people live. You know, no matter how sure they are that they have enough to meet their family obligations, there always is, well, what if, right? Something happens. And so
Right. You don't know.
you need that additional kind of buffer just to be sure that you've met all your obligations. And one thing I was thinking about as you were describing that is, I believe I've seen these charitable remainder trusts able to be structured to where the donor actually, they're accruing income, but they're not actually taking it out all annually. And so, have you ever seen one structured that way, where there's like this ledger balance built up that would eventually be theirs to do something with?
Yeah, yeah. So the acronyms here get long and extensive, but those can be called obviously you see them mostly referred to as a NIM-CRUT, a net income with makeup CRUT, where let's say the family wants a certain percentage of income off of that CRUT, and maybe that's a 5 or 6%, but the asset in the trust actually makes 10 or 12%. Then that additional income can just accrue and be a part of the trust, and now the base is bigger that you get to draw income off of. So that can be certainly a feature of how these CRUTs are formed initially. And I would say for most families that we work with, that's an important consideration. If you're taking a percentage of an asset, what do you do if the asset overperforms or underperforms? And the NIM-CRUT really allows you to manage that well in terms of what does the family need to take from one year to the next based on the performance of the asset and the trust and their needs, right? Some years you need more income than others. The final thing I would say, Bob, in this is it's important to set that, as we're talking about setting up the CRUT, how do you do it? CRUTs are generally structured so that families can get income for health, education, maintenance, and support, right? What you would call a HIMSS standard. And that's great, and that should be considered fantastic. What generous people I would encourage to do is also add the ability for the CRUT itself to be a giver. Yeah. So if the trust can give of its earnings without the family having to receive that income, and that can be set up. It's totally allowable by all legal and tax laws. But for the charitable remainder trust to give during its life directly to charity from its income can be really helpful, because then if the family doesn't need the money and they don't necessarily need to see the assets in the trust grow, the trust can give to their donor advised fund during its life immediately. And people get to give more money away sooner.
Yeah, well, that would be a really important feature if it was going to sit in that what if bucket area you were talking about. Because if you need it, the money's there for you. If you don't need it, the money can be given to charity. You've still got the flexibility. Fantastic discussion. I always think these things are going to last 20 minutes, and here we are at 30 minutes. So I want to thank you again, Ryan, for being on with us. And
always good to see you.
Well, these things are always fascinating, but at the end of the day, we always come back to the same place on these discussions, whatever we're talking about. Every single time it comes down to the individual circumstances. What are their goals? What are their objectives? What do they have to work with? Every time. And so nobody can know all of the possible strategies and ideas out there. You can't be experts on them all, but you can sort through a process of saying, okay, what might work here, and then go to the experts. And so again, you guys are on my short list of experts in this area. So thank you. And next week, we're going to be talking, Zach is actually going to be on next week talking about something completely different, digging into the world of disability. People are, unfortunately, they get sick or hurt and their income is interrupted. So one week we're talking about philanthropy and charitable giving. The next week we're talking about protecting our families against those kinds of things. So great. Zach will be digging into that next week. But this week has been really, really a great conversation. And I thank you for your help. Tell us, as we wrap up, tell us how people reach you if they want to talk to you directly.
Sure. Yeah. You can find us at ncfgiving.com. So again, we're National Christian Foundation, so ncfgiving.com. And then you can find the local office of Austin at ncfgiving.com/Austin. And you'll see me and my team there. And you can connect with us by email or by phone. We'll be glad to be in touch. Bob, it's always great to work with you. You serve your clients well and holistically, talking about your disability conversation and philanthropy. And that's why we love working with you, because you do a great job thinking about the whole person, and we want to support that and be a part of that. Glad to join today.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care. Be safe. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Yeah.